Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we are continuing with the poetry lessons. The poem we're going to do today is called Midterm Break. I would recommend that you sit with your poem and your notes, that you can highlight and add notes while I am explaining. It is a beautiful day to learn something new, so here we go. Right, if we look at information about the poet, he was born on 13 April 1939. He was the eldest of 9 children at the family farmhouse in Northern Ireland. He was at boarding school in 1952 when his brother Christopher was killed in a road accident. This poem is his first of more than 20 volumes of poems, and it was published in 1966. His work was greatly influenced by his childhood in the countryside, and most of his poetry is based on traditions and events in Northern Ireland. Many of his works concern his own family and focus on characters in his own family. The poet died unexpectedly on 30 August 2013 and was, upon his request, laid to rest in the same graveyard as his brother Christopher was buried in. He was buried next to his brother. We're going to read through the poem, Midterm Break. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. In the porch, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride, and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in, and I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest, away at school. As my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. At 10 o'clock, the ambulance arrived with the corpse, stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning, I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. He lay in the 4-foot box as in his cot. No gaudy scars, the bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box, a foot for every year. Now, about this poem. This poem was written in the form of a first person's point of view, so the personal view of this young poet summoned from school after his brother had died. At that moment he was only 14 years old when the accident happened, but the poem captures the family funeral atmosphere in a subtle and sensitive manner. The poet chooses to focus more on the reaction of his parents to the death of their son rather than on his own emotions as a brother. The type of poem is a lyric poem, in other words, a short poem that reveals the speaker's personal feelings, emotions, mood, and state of mind, thoughts, and attitude. It is a beautiful, moving lyrical poem that commemorates a terrible event. Except for the last 2 lines, the lines are unrhymed, and this poem can also be seen as an elegy, which is a poem that is written to commemorate the death of a beloved. The themes in this poem, first of all, death and loss. The coming to terms with death and loss. Number 2, facing death for the first time. Just explains that life is a frail thing. It's easily destroyed. And then the last one, childhood memories, how one is affected by the memories. This happened such a long time ago, but we can see from this poem the enormous effect that this event had on this poet. The title is ambiguous and misleading. Midterm break suggests having a break from school in the middle of the term. For the speaker, this turned into a midterm break as he was called away from school in the middle of the school term to attend his little brother's funeral. But when you see the words midterm break, you automatically think of a break from schoolwork, a time of enjoyment, relaxation. So the connotation of the words midterm breaks is one of holidays and fun, family time. But this poem, however, is about death. That is why the title is misleading. The word break in the title might refer to the fractured family unit, might refer to cutting off ties between the speaker and his younger brother, and also the end of his brother's life. The word break is also a reference to the end of the speaker's own childhood innocence. By the death of his brother, he is forced to grow up and he's forced to deal with grief and loss. And he realized that there is death in the world, and that being a child does not mean that you are safe from death. The tone is somber and sad or mournful. So it's communicating a sense of deep thinking and seriousness. And it changes in the last two lines. The tone becomes calm and peaceful, showing acceptance. Right, line 1. I sat all morning in the college sick bay. He uses the word I because he's a first person narrator. And it gives us a sense of isolation from his friends and his family. He is all by himself. He sat all morning in the college sick bay. The word sat rather than lie emphasizes that he's not sick, even though he's in the sick bay. He has been isolated for another reason. Something bad has happened. He's waiting to be picked up. The word sat also emphasizes inactivity. He's doing nothing. And that relates to the next two words, all morning. The use of all emphasizes the slow passing of time. He has nothing to do but to wait. So the time passes very slowly. A sick bay is usually a room where learners go who are too ill to attend classes. He is waiting in the sick bay instead of the reception. This emphasizes the unpleasantness of his mood or the state of mind in the light of what awaited him at home. It appears at this stage as if he knew that his brother had died, because he later uses the verb knelling and not ringing. In line 2, counting bells, knelling classes to a close. The word counting bells shows us this boy has nothing better to do to pass the time. It shows his impatience or even boredom, so he keeps himself busy by counting the school bells, indicating the end of a period or the end of a lesson. So it is clear that he's impatient because he's anxious. He desperately wants to get home. The counting of the bell indicates again that the time passes slowly and he's been waiting for a long period of time. The use of the alliteration of the C sound and the assonance of the E both suggest the repetitive ringing of the bell. It also emphasizes the speaker's confusion. He uses the word knelling instead of ringing, and this creates an ominous tone. Knelling is usually associated with funerals and death, not with the ringing of a school bell. So it reminds you of the slow, mournful ringing of a funeral bell. So we as the reader gets the impression that something bad has or is about to happen. It foreshadows disaster. A contrast is implied here. Normally joy is associated with classes that end, but in this case, there is a sense of sadness. He's thinking of death to such an extent that all bells sound like funeral bells to him. To a close, those words indicate the end of a class or a lesson. It might also allude to the closing of his brother's life. Line 3. Now the poet remembers the precise time when he says at 2 o'clock. He remembers the precise time that he was picked up, and by remembering that, it indicates how traumatized he was at hearing the news of his brother's death. So remembering the exact dates and times emphasize that the event is so unforgettable, in this case tragic, that everything about it is etched on his memory. People remember traumatic, life-changing events vividly. I refer you back to the theme of childhood memories. So this also emphasized that it was a long, drawn-out waiting period. He had too much time to think or brood about what had happened. The word neighbors, at 2 o'clock our neighbors drove me home. He's driven home by his neighbors, not his parents. And this also may indicate that something is wrong, which is why the parents could not pick him up. Maybe his parents are waiting at home for the body of his brother to be delivered, or they may also be too emotional to drive. Line 4. In the porch, I met my father crying. Now here we encounter the first sign of grief, and that is his father waiting for him to arrive, but standing on the porch outside on the veranda, and he is crying. So his father cries outside on the veranda away from all the people who have gathered in the house for the funeral wake. And this also creates a feeling of sadness and pity and empathy in the reader. The words, my father crying. The poet was shocked that his father was crying, as this is entirely out of character. Tough men like his father showing emotion is not something that he is used to. This is a further indication that something terrible has happened. This line ends with a dash, and it creates a pause and emphasizes his shock. It indicates that an explanation will follow, so he will explain why is he so surprised to see his father crying. Furthermore, the fact that his father is outside on the veranda ensures that this is the first member of the family the young boy sees when he arrives home, and it sets the trend for the confusion and heartache that he will be exposed to. Line 5. He had always taken funerals in his stride. Now the words taken funerals in his stride is obviously still talking about his father, that's the he. The words taken funerals in his stride is he contrasts his father's unusual behavior here with the way he normally behaves. Usually, his father is able to cope easily with funerals. He's never really emotionally affected. He is usually the one to console the other people, but clearly this is not the case here. Right, so this creates further suspense. The reader will want to know what it is, what is so extraordinary that it results in the father's strange, out of character behavior. So the fact that he is crying tells us that the death has affected him deeply. In other words, it had to be somebody very dear to him. There's another dash at the end of this line, and it's also used to create a pause and emphasizes his disbelief and confusion at witnessing his father's odd behavior. This foreshadows that something really bad has happened, and it emphasizes the fact that his father is deeply touched by this tragedy. Line 6. And Big Jim Evans saying, "It was a hard blow." He starts the line with "and," meaning in addition to. So it is used to introduce an additional comment that will shed light on his father's strange behavior. Big Jim Evans is a nickname for a caring neighbor or a family friend, and he is present to support and comfort the family. And Big Jim affirms that the situation is indeed very difficult for everybody involved. The words, "it was a hard blow," it usually means when something is devastating. In this case, the neighbors avoid talking about the young brother's death. They call it a hard blow. Now, there is a pun or wordplay on the words hard blow. It has a double meaning. The actual physical impact of the vehicle hitting the child against the head, causing his death, is the literal meaning. And the emotional blow to the family, the death of a child, is extremely tragic. It's an extremely devastating experience for everybody involved. That is the figurative meaning. Line 7. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram. First of all, look at the antithesis. There's an extreme contrast between the father's behavior in the previous stanza and the baby's sibling's behavior here. The father is sad and is crying while the baby is laughing and happy. And this contrast only emphasizes the sadness. The words cooed and laughed. The baby is obviously too young to understand what has happened and why everyone is so depressed and sad. He is the only one in the house who seems to be happy. And that was his reaction, happiness, when his older brother entered. He was happy to see him. He was too small to understand what was going on. So that is where the word laughed comes in. The baby seems to react to the entrance of his brother with joy. So this innocence and the fact that he's unaware of the events and grief that reign in the house is in stark contrast to the gloomy atmosphere. The word rocked. The baby is so happy when he hears his brother's voice that he kicks vigorously, that the pram shakes and rocks. The word cooed refers to the soft murmuring sound that the young baby makes and is compared to the cooing sound made by a dove. It's a soothing sound associated with peace, serenity, and tranquility, in direct contrast with what is happening inside the house. Line 8. When I came in, so the first part of line 8 is still part of line 7. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in. So that was the reason for the baby's reaction. He responded with joy when the elder sibling returned home after being away at school. And then he goes on and he says, and I was embarrassed. So as the oldest child, he's treated like a mature member of the family, and that makes him feel uncomfortable or embarrassed, mainly because he's not used to it and he's unsure about how to react to such treatment. So embarrassed here shows us the emotion of the speaker, and this is the last time in the poem that the speaker mentions his personal emotions. Part of the success and power of this poem comes from the fact that the speaker never allows his own feeling to become the focal point. Instead, he communicates the pain and shock of the death by focusing on the adult's responses. The poem is not about him. It's about his brother and the pain of others, mainly his parents. So he says in line 8, I was embarrassed, and line 9 goes on, by old men standing up to shake my hand. Now the old men standing up to shake my hand is a reversal of roles. Usually younger people get up to greet older people coming into a room. Now the older people stand up to shake his hand, to sympathize with his loss, and that makes him feel extremely uncomfortable. That is the reversal of roles. And this profoundly sad death in the family is forcing the speaker to grow up, and he finds it extremely difficult and confusing. Again, I refer to the theme of coming to terms with grief or death, and then the childhood memories again, where we can say about the loss of childhood innocence. Then in line 10, still the older men talking to him, and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Now usually people say we're sorry to hear about your terrible loss of a family member because it's a difficult subject to talk about. Now this is obviously a euphemism, the words sorry for my trouble. Rather than using the word death, the people refer to his loss as trouble. So again, this indicates that it's a difficult subject to talk about. But look at the irony. Trouble is usually something that will pass, but yet the grief of a relative that has died, especially a young child, will not pass. Line 11, whispers informed strangers, I was the eldest. Now, the people present talk in whispers, so they are whispering. But whispers is personified. It's given a human ability to inform or to tell something. And the hushed silence highlights the sympathetic attitude of the neighbors and the friends. Out of respect for the person who has died, people usually talk in muted tones and when sympathizing with someone for their loss. Look at the repetition of the S. It captures the hushed, muted atmosphere in the house. Now the strangers, some of the people who have come to sympathize, are unknown to the speaker. And this just adds to his discomfort. It makes him feel even more uncomfortable. Line 12 is still part, the first part is still part of line 11. Whispers informed strangers, I was the eldest away at school. So the speaker was at boarding school when the accident happened. And then he goes on and he says, as my mother held my hand. His mother is devastated, but still sensitive to the need of her eldest child for comfort. She needs to be comforted too, and therefore she holds his hand. The H alliteration, held my hand, emphasized the need for comfort. It is here shown by touch. She's not saying anything. She is just holding his hand. And the line 13 goes on where he says, my mother held my hand in hers. So the two stanzas are linked through the use of enjambment. The words coughed out. These words indicate how difficult it is for the mother to deal with her emotions. She's almost aggressively, she's letting out audible sighs. And then she says, angry, tearless sighs. So we are told that this mother is too angry to cry. But we are not told why. We can only speculate. Her anger may be directed at the driver of the car that caused the death, the person who had to look after the child, if that was the case. She can be angry at herself, or even she can be angry at God for allowing this to happen. The words tearless sighs, possible interpretations may be that she has cried so much that she has no tears left to cry, or she's so shocked that she finds herself unable to cry. She can only repeatedly sigh, or she's so angry or upset she has not yet acknowledged the fact that the little boy is indeed dead. Look at the contrast between the father and the mother. The father isolates himself and cries, where the mother seems to find it difficult to start the grieving process. She shows her emotions by sighing angrily. Now the speaker himself seemed to be completely overwhelmed by an array of confusing and contrasting emotions. Remember, the focus is not on his emotions, but on the emotions of the grown-ups. Line 14. At 10 o'clock, the ambulance arrived. Once again, the poet remembers the exact time. Again, it indicates how dramatic the experience was for him. The sight of the ambulance arriving with his brother's body is something he will never forget. It also emphasizes that it has been an exceptionally long, tiresome day. The ambulance arrived. The ambulance arrives with his baby brother's body. Now, historically and culturally, it was customary in Ireland to display a body in the house before the burial so that friends and family can say a last goodbye. With the corpse stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Now he's using the word corpse, and the word is clinical and a little cold, and it seems insensitive and unemotional. But it suggests that the poet seems detached. He does not see this body as being that of his younger brother. He has dehumanized the body as a lifeless thing in an attempt to cope with his grief. Remember, the speaker was only 14 years old, and he found it difficult to understand death and to come to terms with all the contrasting emotions that he is bombarded with. It may also show the speaker's refusal to accept his brother's death. He is in a state of denial and disbelief. The word stanched means to stop or restrict bleeding and to clean the wound. The words together, stanched and bandaged, refers to the failed attempts to save the child. The idea is that he was attended to after the accident. Medical personnel tried to save him, but they failed. Line 16. Next morning, I went up into the room. Now the next morning, the speaker goes up alone to his brother's room. This is the place where his brother's body is laid out for viewing by the family and friends. So the mood here is calmer. There's, however, no direct reference to how he feels. He describes only what he sees. In this description, through the choice of words, we get a strong sense of the grief and loss he experiences. Snowdrops are small, white, fragile spring flowers with drooping heads. This effectively symbolizes sadness. They are also regarded as symbols of innocence, hope, and rebirth. Now, the first snowdrops of the season are a source of joy and celebration of new life and hope after a long winter. Even in the depths of darkness, they are reminders that love prevails. In other words, here they symbolize life after death. The color of the flower is also significant. It represents the purity and fragility of the young child who died. Snowdrops are pale flowers. It is a whiteness that resembles the death and the child's paleness. Snowdrops also do not retain their flowers and their beauty for long, and this also corresponds with the short lifespan of the little boy. Line 17, and candles soothe the bedside. So snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. So here a peaceful effect is created by the white flowers and the candles. It makes it appear as if his brother is only sleeping. Now, candles are lit in times of death. They symbolize light in darkness and signify afterlife. They are symbols of joy and life-giving power. The word soothed. To soothe means to calm or relieve a person's pain. There is a calm and relaxing atmosphere in the room. It's a place of peace, and it contrasts greatly with the busy, confusing scene the speaker walked into. There's also personification. While the flowers and candles can soothe a person, they cannot soothe an inanimate thing. So it's the place beside the bed. Candle softens or eases the harshness of viewing the dead child. There's a peaceful and relaxing atmosphere in the room. What this description actually tells you is that the candles and the flower eased the pain the speaker was feeling as he stood beside the bed. And then the last three words in the line, I saw him. Now he appears to be calmer, the speaker, and he no longer refers to his brother as the corpse. He refers to him as him. He acknowledges it as his brother, and he says, I saw him. And in the next line, for the first time in 6 weeks, so he has last seen him 6 weeks ago. Right. So in line 18, I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now. For the first time in 6 weeks, there might be a sense of guilt as he realizes that things happen while you are away. He was away at boarding school. He has not seen his brother in the last 6 weeks before his death. So at first, it does not seem that he has come to terms with the death of his brother, but the use of him changes this. He seems to have come to grips with his brother's death. He now seems ready to face the reality. Paler now. He still has the memory of his brother prior to the accident, and it's an understatement, these words, followed by a comma. And it's hang at the end of the stanza, causing a sad pause before the sentence continue to describe how little the brother has changed in appearance, even in death. The only difference is his paler complexion and the small bruise on his left temple. And that comes to light in line 19, where he says, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. Right, the mood changes in the final stanza where we are presented with an image of a pale white face with a deep red bruise on the left temple. You all know the temple is the flat, soft area on the side of the forehead. The poet uses a metaphor, wearing a poppy bruise. Literally, the shape, size, and color of the bruise on his temple is compared to the shape, size, and red color of the petals of a poppy flower. The speaker uses this metaphor to indicate that the only scar his brother has is a reddish bruise on the temple, resembling a poppy flower. Now, the poppy, there's some symbolism for that flower. Poppies have long been used as a symbol of death and remembrance. The metaphor, wearing a poppy bruise, the word wearing, suggests that this injury seems almost unreal, as if it's not part of his brother, as if it's temporary and could be removed at any point, so that he would not be dead anymore. However, this was the injury that killed him, a violent blow to the left temple as he was hit by the car. Line 20. He lay in a 4-foot box as in his cot. He lay in the 4-foot box as in his cot. Now, 4-foot box, first of all, is a euphemism. He uses the word box rather than coffin. His brother was only recently a baby that lay in a cot with his whole life ahead of him. Now he is an inanimate, a lifeless object, is lying in a box. The simile, 4-foot box as in his cot. By comparing the coffin to a cot, the speaker symbolizes how peaceful and safe the child looked. He seemed at peace, as if he were only sleeping. Sleeping and death resemble each other in that one's eyes are closed and one does not move. Line 21. No gaudy scars. The bumper knocked him clear. No gaudy scars. The boy's outward appearance has not been damaged by the accident. There's no ugly bruises visible. The bumper knocked him clear. The car's bumper has hit the boy against his left temple, which caused his death. He was not run over by the car. Knocked him clear. It was sudden, unexpected death. Line 22. A 4-foot box. A foot for every year. Now the F alliteration, 4-foot box, a foot for every year. The F alliteration and the repetition of the word foot emphasize the small size and the youth of the boy. So life is short. The little boy was only 4 years old. This single line stanza, given in isolation, emphasizes the tragedy of the boy dying so young and the intensity of emotion at the loss of his brother. And the speaker notices that the size of the coffin is approximately 4 foot long. A foot is about 30 centimeters. Therefore, the coffin is only about 1,2 meters long. By mentioning the exact size of the coffin, the speaker emphasizes how tragic it is that this child has died at such a young age. He makes use of a metaphor, a 4-foot box, a foot for every year. The small coffin measures out the life of the victim in years and signifies the shortness of his life. This line is filled with pathos. It arouses the reader's sympathy. Again, the alliteration of the F. So the repetition of that F sound makes one realize how small and young this boy was. The deliberate stress of the F sound in the final line indicate that the speaker is angry and bitter at the waste of life that has occurred. So the last 2 lines seals off the poem, reminding us how unexpectedly death comes upon one. One can die at any time and at any age. The emphasis then moves to the challenging grieving process that must follow. Now this concludes the lesson on the poem Midterm Break. I sincerely hope that all of you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a wonderful afternoon. Make wise choices. Goodbye.